And I think what you'll get from this next couple of sessions is I'm going to walk through, and you're going to hear three very different perspectives. So I'm going to have three panelists. First, I'll bring up Ashi Sareen, who's with LinkedIn. So she leads one of the SRE teams at LinkedIn. So I'll go ahead and ask her to come up on stage. Please, Ashi. You can. Thank you. You guys all know Sanchit. He was just in the previous, so he's running site reliability engineering for Dell.com. So I'm going to ask Sanchit to come back up on stage. And then finally, I'm going to ask Tammy Buteau to come up. So Tammy is the principal SRE at Gremlin and has also done site reliability engineering at companies like Dropbox. So Tammy. All right, welcome.
Thank you.
How are you guys doing?
Great, thanks.
Great, thank you.
So I gave quick just terms of name and kind of what your function is, but I would love to just kind of go down the line first, starting maybe with you, Ashi. If you could just tell me a little bit about you, your role, and kind of what site reliability engineering looks like for you and your team.
Absolutely. So I'm Ashi. I am the director of SRE at LinkedIn. And my background has always been in infrastructure, in the mobile space, in Oracle Cloud, as a firewall engineer in network security background. And at LinkedIn, I'm responsible for the reliability, the scalability, the operational excellence of the backend infrastructure. Great.
And Sanchit, is it fair to ask you again, maybe a little bit more detail? You went into some in your previous.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a point that what SRE has done for me is allowed me to be exposed to a lot of different disciplines in IT, like security, network, and so on. And that's been really empowering for SRE at Dell. I think it's fantastic for us in terms of career growth and paths forward. I just wanted to add that.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Appreciate that. And Tammy, you're new to the audience, so maybe you could talk a little bit more about you and your role.
Yeah, sure. So I joined Gremlin back in late 2017, and I was the 9th employee. I joined as the first SRE, which was very exciting. And yeah, now I've been at Gremlin for a while, and one of my main responsibilities is running game days. So that is actually because Gremlin builds software to do chaos engineering as a service or failure injection as a service. We actually run game days on Gremlin using Gremlin. And I think that's a really important thing to be able to do, to identify critical failures. And then actually one of my roles is to make sure that those get fixed quickly. So yeah, I'm all about metrics and tracking everything. So I always try and fix everything in a month.
Great. So it's interesting. I think it's a broad perspective here in that we have sort of a cloud native company, if you don't mind me saying that. We have more of a traditional e-commerce solution and now a startup. But you all do site reliability engineering. Do you guys have a definition in your organizations for what site reliability engineering is? And maybe I'll just go right down the line again. Do you have a definition, Ashi?
Sure. I think site reliability is a lot of things. So I'll try to put it in three key points. One is keeping the site up. I think as owners of this backend infrastructure, we are responsible to do anything to make sure that the site is up and running, our customers have the best experience. The other key element of SRE is the E piece, the engineering piece, where we are constantly coding. Our goal is to sort of automate ourselves out of our own jobs. And the other key aspect is this relationship. I know you've talked about that too, where we are an embedded SRE organization. So our goal is to make sure that we are constantly empowering our development teams to be able to do things in a faster velocity, to have these relationships where we give them these guiding principles, we build these self-service tools, and make sure that development happens at a very fast rate.
OK, great. Is there a formal definition at Dell.com?
Well, Ashi hasn't left much for me to say, but I'll just add that one thing that we started SRE off with was, what are those things that keep occurring again and again that we can just either go automate or figure out the real root cause? That was something that we were missing constantly because we go from one problem to the next, and we don't have enough time to go back and really fix the problem. So that's one thing that we've sort of imbibed in our SRE culture at Dell, is when a problem occurs, we really go deep and we bring all the expertise available at the company to tell us and go over it and tell us, what's really going on here? What can we fix? So that's something that I just wanted to add as well.
Okay, great. Tammy?
For me, SRE means focusing on ensuring you're creating a positive impact for the customer. So that's so important to me, and it's all about availability and durability. So often we talk about, uptime, how many nines do you have? But I think one of the worst things that can possibly happen is if you lose all of your customer data. There's no backup. If you can't recover, what do? That's your business gone. Especially like in the opening talks, how we said, 7 of the 10 top companies are technology companies these days. So durability is very important. And one of the things that I think is important to remember too is if SREs don't own durability as a responsibility, like who does? Because the security team doesn't. They care a lot more if data gets stolen, but if data is completely wiped and gone, that's the SRE's role and responsibility. So, yeah.
Interesting. Okay, great. So hopefully that provides some context. Again, I know about half the audience is currently, based on the poll, doing about another quarter or so or looking. So we'll get back to that in a second. But what I want to do is maybe talk a little bit about picking up where you just left off, Tammy. What is in scope and what's out of scope, more importantly, for the SRE function for you?
Yeah, so the main thing is definitely you need to be figuring out what metrics do you want to track. And I think that's a very important thing to start off, to say we need to measure all of our SRE activities and we need to make sure that there's an ROI for those activities. So that's how I start everything. And then I also think it depends on how much time you have. So for example, because we're a small startup, we can still do SRE work and we need to, We were doing it since before I started and I was a 9th employee. Now we have around 70 employees and we still do a lot of SRE work. But as I worked at larger companies, you end up just doing more. Like you're able to identify more critical issues. I think SREs should be involved from the start when you're doing the edit and test loop in development, so actually local development. I've done a lot of SRE work there to make sure developer environments are reliable and available for developers. That's SRE work too, all the way out to shipping your code and having it in production. I think some of the things that you can say are not an SRE's responsibility are things that you can help scale out across your engineering organization. You don't want SREs to become a bottleneck for availability and durability. That would be really bad.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. And then maybe, Ashi, I'll ask you the same question. Is there anything that's in or out of scope from a LinkedIn perspective?
Absolutely. So nothing is out of scope. Some of the key values LinkedIn has instilled across the board is to act like an owner, which means everything is your problem. The other key thing is that when a problem happens, Bruno, who's our head of the SRE department, he's kind of like with Tammy, who started this organization. He always tells us that we need to make sure that we're attacking the problem, not the people, which means this whole culture of having blameless postmortems, talking about the hard things. And I think that's a very key part of being in scope is to be able to get everybody together and talk about those hard problems.
Yeah.
Tammy, you talked about a lot about before when we were talking about chaos engineering. I think those are the hard things to talk about. What happens when things break,
Yep.
and those are the conversations that SREs needs to start and evangelize.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I would agree.
Perfect. Okay, so that's a little bit about kind of the function, but I do want to touch on where the site reliability engineering function lives. So maybe, Sanjay, I'll come back to you. Are there multiple SRE teams? Is there just one? Where does it kind of live?
Well, from my organization, it lives under Dell.com. That's where it's situated at the moment. But Dell as a whole does have multiple SRE teams. The other day, we were talking to the SRE team at VMware and comparing notes. Although we're very disparate functions, we're taking care of e-commerce side. They're building VMs. But we are becoming an organization with multiple SRE teams.
And are you sort of a vertically integrated team just supporting the website, or would you consider yourself part of IT or technology?
It's a good question. It was initially, from what I remember, sponsored by the IT team, but we right now are working on supporting the website. So sponsored across broad sponsorship, but right now we're showing our value by ROI, as Tammy was talking about, and how we can keep the site available. That's where a lot of money gets generated.
Okay, great. Ashi, Tammy, where does it live in your respective organizations?
Yeah, so for me, I think the most important thing to do is to figure out what are your top 5 most critical systems. So that's something that I think works really well. So if you start off there and go, well, generally it's actually usually the same things. Number 1, traffic, so Nginx. That's always going to be one of your most critical systems. You need to have an SRE focused on that. The next one is usually databases. That's often a problem area. And generally, I think I've seen that at most companies, it's always those top 5 systems are pretty similar. Another one might be Kafka if you're doing something like that. And then my favorite model is having embedded SREs. So SREs working alongside the software engineers in those teams. And then once they've solved those critical issues, they then rotate to a different area of the company that also needs help, and then they can rotate back if needed. But that's a nice way, I think, to scale out your SRE organization as you grow your company and create more teams and more products.
Yeah. So do you then meet as a virtual SRE team? How do you kind of keep the SREs involved in communicating?
You do exactly that. You create an SRE community so that SREs have their own offsites, they have their own Slack channel, they get together, they share resources, they do training sessions together. Also, I think game days are really helpful because you can invite your entire organization to participate and observe the game days. So that's a really nice technical way to just collaborate and come together.
Okay. Okay, so thank you, appreciate that. I think the other thing that's come up a few times as you all were talking are metrics and KPIs and what to measure. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about that. I know, Ashi, yours is an interesting answer because you make it all publicly available. So maybe you could touch on that a little.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that we track everything. We have 500 plus metrics. They're tracked at every level. At our engineering VP level, we talk about it on a constant basis. Some of the key elements are site speed, the number of site outages, what kind of outages they are, how much time it took, the MTTD, MTDR, which is mean time to respond and mean time to detect, and everything, pretty much capacity planning, forecasting, and your mobile experience. So a variety of things get measured, and whatever gets measured gets fixed. So
yeah, so true.
Cool. For the others, do you have key metrics? Is it 500? That's a lot. Do you have a number, or is it more a particular type of metric that you kind of focus on?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll go to Tammy.
My favorite metric to track is MTTD. My favorite so much that I actually wrote a book about it for O'Reilly. Because, I really believe that if you aren't tracking MTTD, then your customers are going to be having a bad experience. Because MTTD is focused on the customer. It is going from this is when the issue started to this is when we actually were able to detect it as a company. And, you see that happening quite a lot where you see customers complaining on Twitter before the company even knows that there's a problem. And sometimes it can be minutes, but sometimes it can be really bad, hours, days, years before an incident's actually detected. And the other metric I think is important to track is the mean time to actually resolving your action items that come out of postmortems, because that is not often tracked. Very important.
Nice. And do your metrics change much over time, or are they pretty static? Do you learn and adapt and evolve as the site evolves, or do you try to say, nope, these are the core ones? I don't know, Sanjay, how it works for you.
For us, I'm not allowed to share a lot of data, but what I would say is that yes, metrics do evolve. I mean, I'm taking notes as Tammy and Ashi are speaking. I'm going to take those back there. But for example, for us, we had a 60% year-on-year improvement in P1, P2s after our site reliability team was engaged. They do evolve. They do evolve, and we're still learning. We're a newer site reliability team. We're still finding our ground, but we're getting there. We're getting there, and we've already seen ROI multiple times with our SRE team. It's 3x, 4x, whatever. We're way past what we invested.
Yeah, they have to be kind of evolving, right? Because I think the problems we see today, those problems get solved, and the next set comes in, and the next set comes in based on the way your service is growing, the usage of it. So it's sort of a constant revision that you have to do. That what do you care about most at that time?
Yeah, I actually wrote a technical paper on how to establish an incident management program, which you can find if you Google that. And I talk about the key metrics that every company should track, but then I think it depends on what industry you're in, because if you're in e-commerce, then you definitely want to be tracking specific metrics for the checkout process, for shopping carts, for payment processing. So that's just an important thing to think about. SRE really does differ based on your industry.
Okay. All right. Great. So one thing I'm also hearing a lot is it sounds very cross-disciplinary. So what do you look for in the skill sets on your team? What makes a good site reliability engineer? I'll open it up. We'll go down the line.
Sure. What makes a good site reliability engineer is people who are inquisitive, people who are just not looking for, one service to work or two services to work, people who like to look at the full system in a holistic way, folks that are kind of thinking of the future, about being proactive in terms of what could go wrong, thinking about failure options, people who are able to do reverse engineering as well as be able to code, write these automation tool set that we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're looking for that all-star who gets everything, gets network, security, Linux, all of it. But at the same time, because we can't get those kind of people all the time, what we do is bring. Because a company the size of Dell, you do have experts in these disciplines. We bring them all together under one roof, and then everybody starts to learn. Like, I've learned so much from my fellow SRE team members, and that's how we're sort of growing our culture internally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tammy?
I think usually when I'm hiring for SREs, one of the things I think about is that there's this curve. So on the left, there's the systems engineering skills like Linux, operation skills, incident management, debugging, and then on the other side, there's software engineering skills. And maybe you find the perfect unicorn SRE right in the middle that has perfect skills across both areas. But also often you'll find people who are amazing at debugging really technical issues. Maybe they do something that you really need specifically, for example, at Dropbox, I was the SRE manager for MySQL. So of course I want SREs who specialize in MySQL to be able to help me fix those issues. So yeah, I think again it comes back to your company and what technology you have. If you're running Nginx and you want an SRE who has Nginx experience, that's going to make your life a lot easier too.
Yeah, excellent. And so it's interesting, though, you kind of talk about that bell curve and the unicorn.
Yeah.
And so if you can't find that, I assume you need to find the skill sets in aggregate. So how
Yeah.
big do SRE teams get? Or is there a lot of these folks are just getting started. Do you have a rule of thumb for how companies should think about when to start one and what size to grow it to? I'll start with you, Tammy, since you're just talking about it.
Yeah, so people often talk about this. How many SREs should you have per software engineer? And I think if you have around one SRE for 4 to 5 software engineers, that's usually pretty good. But definitely, I think it's something where you start small and you gradually grow, because if you hire too many SREs at the same time, I've seen that actually be very bad. So yeah, I think it's just important to go gradually, step by step.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that 4 to 5 to get started is pretty good to get the skill set mix?
Yeah, I think that is really good. That's the dream, though. It's very hard to hire SREs, I'll say that.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, we started off with a team of I think around 10 people, and that's starting to grow and expand. And exactly like how Tammy mentioned, we had an SRE team for Dell.com. Now we're expanding it to our other verticals like Premiere and there will be more and more that will be added. But yes, specific to a particular business function, I think 10 to 15 people for us is pretty good. We don't want to bloat it to 100 people SRE organization. We can very easily. We've got the people to do it. But they're like these snipers that know exactly what to do. That's what we're building here.
Great. Ashi, any guidance?
Yeah, well, Sanchit and Tammy covered a lot of areas. I think the only thing I have to add is it all depends on your company. It really, the SRE function is to look at this overall umbrella of things. It is to sort of go deep into building automation around things. So as a result of which, it all depends on where your highest ROI is. A lot of times at LinkedIn, what we have done is there's so much demand. Every team wants to have an SRE. But if you create these checks and boundaries and create these self-service systems where people are empowered themselves to do the part of the SRE role, and then you really don't need integrated SRE in all teams, but especially in high-volume areas, critical services, it is very important to have them. And the ratio really depends on how much time you want to spend in firefighting versus investing in the future. So, if that service has, you've done an analysis and it needs a lot of touch points, then you have to invest a lot in it. And over time, the goal is to reduce that investment and have those SREs work in different departments.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, to reuse the investment. Like, for example, what you can do is if you have an SRE join a team, they can track how many incidents happen per week, how many alerts are fired, and then one of their metrics, their goals or OKRs should be that they should try and reduce that. They should reduce the weekly incident count, but that means they're able to do other work and make a bigger impact in a different area. But busy work or toil, which is just constantly firefighting and dealing with incidents, really wastes a lot of time. But SREs are really amazing at going in and getting back time. Yeah.
Yeah. You said automate yourself out of a job. So
Yep.
that's a strong statement.
That's our goal.
Exactly.
And one more follow-up question for you, Tammy. So you said you started small. Do you see
Yep.
that's a common trend? I mean, I know NGINX, we're in the heart of Silicon Valley. Do you see a lot of startups have SREs almost from day one?
I'm actually seeing a lot more companies having SREs definitely now. That is quite new. I guess, when I first moved to America, that's like 5 years ago now, I worked at DigitalOcean and we had SREs there. When I was in Australia, I was working at the National Australia Bank. We didn't have the role of SRE, but I've seen that even in big, large banks and enterprises, they do a lot of SRE-like work because you need to, for regulations, you need to do disaster recovery testing, which is usually an SRE's role and responsibility now. So I'm just finding that startups are going, well, if I actually help build this product and make it reliable, make it durable from day one, then there's going to be a lot less pain, on day 1,000. And that's 100% true.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right, so I think we're in the home stretch here. I just have one last question for each of you, which is the theme of this event is level up. And we're trying to help folks think about leveling up their infrastructure, their apps, or even their teams. I think this one's been a little bit more focused on the teams and the softer side, which is great. So if you had one piece of advice for the audience, what would it be? What would you want to impart on them, given your experience to date? So I'll just go down the line. So Ashi, if you have any advice.
Sure. One advice that I have is, especially in the SRE world, what I'm seeing a lot is people are just renaming their ops teams to call them SRE. I don't think that's the right approach. SRE discipline requires investment. It has a very clear set of practices, set of team dynamics that makes a successful SRE team. There is a talk in SRE Con that was given by one of my peers, Ben, which talks about different stages of SRE, and I think it's very important. There's a firefighting stage, a gatekeeper stage, a partner, and then eventually an engineer. And I think you want to get to that stage. You don't want, if you really want to invest in an SRE team, then having them just focus on the firefighting and gatekeeping is not the right way to go. So you want to advance it. You want to invest in that team and make it into an engineering organization.
Okay, great.
Absolutely. It's not like, for example, at Dell, it's not like we didn't have people fixing the site before we had an SRE team. But really investing into people to be engineers in that role, using a framework, and Ashi was sharing that LinkedIn's even shared a blog about what are the metrics you want to use. Tammy's written a book. So actually using those frameworks and content out there to actually structure a formal SRE organization, invest in it, get the right people in it. That's advice I would definitely give, rather than, as Ashi said, just rename it to SRE.
Okay, great. Tammy.
Well, one of my secrets that's helped me really get some great metrics and be able to showcase great work at the end of the day has always been doing failure injection, which is definitely the reason that I decided to join Gremlin, because it was the first chaos engineering company. But for example, one of the things I was able to do was get a 10x reduction in incidents in 3 months by actually injecting failure on purpose. And I think of it as very precise failure, more like surgery, heart surgery, that sort of a thing, where you're really trying to identify the issue and then resolve it it, which is really hard. It's like very tough technical work, and it also requires your company to buy into you doing that work. But I think it's worth it. And the other thing that I've used failure injection for is on-call training. You know, so often we throw the pager at someone and say, good luck, like, have a nice day. That's really dangerous for the company, like dangerous for the customer, and just not a good experience. So instead, you can actually use failure injection to actually trigger the incident, make it happen, and then train your team during the day when everyone's feeling more relaxed, when you've got everyone there to help them understand how it works, whether it's like DNS failover or some sort of other critical issue that happens quite frequently. I think that's an important thing. So that's my secret tip for how I've got good metric results.
I love it. I love it. Well, excellent. I really appreciate it. I mean, to me, when I was going through this with you all and kind of studying up on it, we see these kind of waves. You know, IT ops became DevOps. You mentioned IT ops getting rebadged as SRE, but it's clearly a distinct profession and team and function that's coming out. I think the biggest takeaway for me is it's not just for cloud native companies. It's not just for small companies that think cloud first. It's really becoming a discipline we see across all companies. So I really appreciate you guys coming and taking the time to help educate. Hopefully, as the audience, you found this was useful. Again, I know half of you are either looking at or about to get started on this. So I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. If everyone could give a round of applause for our panelists.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right.